It will be kind of a different film than what you've used to seeing, but it still walks the same line as far as values. But always remember, though, Z4, the Zeitgeist film series, is not exact representation of the movement. It's always a more general amalgam of values and interests and social commentary. So number 4, some of the members have suggested changing the name of the movement to disassociate us from the movies. While I personally couldn't care less, have you considered this as well? End of question. Well, yes, that's been talked about for quite a while. And in the end, I consider it arbitrary, and I like the definition of the term zeitgeist, meaning the spirit of the time, the zeitgeist movement, a movement to the spirit of the time, a movement of culture. So I actually like it. As far as the movies itself, I've done everything I can to explain to people the difference, and anyone who takes a moment to review the website understands the obvious difference. We don't promote the things in the films per se. The films might promote some of the elements that we talk about, but it isn't the other way around. It's obvious enough. Number 5. I know the question. I know the Zeitgeist Media Festival is coming up, but is there still a possibility for Shara Tankian? I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. Or Immortal Technique to be contacted. I'm sorry, we're booked for the LA main event. They should be doing things in their region, I hope, if they're interested in that communication. But thank you for the notion. Number 6. Sorry, English is broken here. How will the morals be determined, morals and ethics be determined in a resource-based economy? The problem is that these subjects are subjective and they can't be applied to the scientific method. Scientific method can only be applied for objective, etc. End of question. Okay, actually that's not true. The morals and ethics, what are morals and ethics? Morals and ethics are ways you approach the world, worldviews, how you associate yourself with other people and the physical world around you, and the practices that come along with that. In my view, there's only one, well, I've been quoted as saying God is in the laws of nature and nothing more. And what I mean by that is that if you don't actually pay attention to scientific causality and base your worldview, morals, and ethics on what you learn from that causality, which is testable and everything else that goes along with the scientific premise, then your morals and ethics might have a propensity to be corrupt. Doesn't mean that it's not emergent, doesn't mean there isn't change. Obviously, you go back to ancient Greece, they still had slaves, and they probably felt, even with all their intellectual capacity, that was still morally viable, when it obviously isn't, because it isn't sustainable as a species. It's not it's not a fluffy thing where you say this is positive and this is negative. It's what works and what create sustainability and things that are actually valued, which again is derived from the species sustainability. So nuclear war, for example, is obviously amoral by its very concept because it has the propensity to destroy human life, and in fact all of human life if we were to detonate all the currently available nuclear warheads, etc. So to summarize that, moral and ethics has to be pulled from something real and tangible, has to have a physical referent of some kind, if you know what I mean by that. Otherwise, it's just floating ideology. And as I've said it before with my objections to economics and politics and religion, very few philosophies within those contexts actually have a relationship to the life ground, as we call it, or the earth and natural scientific processes. And that's a huge, huge problem, and why we have the problems we do today across the board. Okay, number 7. How do we deal with trolls and the angry self-appointed guardians of the status quo? You be very patient and you pick your battles very carefully. If you're talking to someone like this, you just have to feel them out. If they just go into name calling and prima facie associations and straw man, which was what I call the circus, then you have to move on and go for the low-hanging fruit. Don't torture yourself by trying to convert somebody who obviously is hell-bent on trying to insult you or trying to one-up you in a very often juvenile manner. Just don't waste your time. Let's see. Number 8. Hold on, this is a long one. I think actually they're answering the questions. So number 8. Mentioning that the open source methodology will be a dominant force in the transition to an RBE if the open source community can spill out a new Linux kernel. It's far more complex. Hold on a second. Yes, open source. the question is basically about open source. Open source is where everything should be. We have seen the revolution of open source as far as integrity with Wikipedia, at least for technical things. I, of course, don't think Wikipedia should have opinionated elements at all regarding a lot of things, but it should be about technical elements only. But that's just my view. It's far too distorted when there's nothing to balance against. You're just dealing with human opinion about certain things. But those attributes of encyclopedia references are very sound. I think it was 94% accuracy with Wikipedia. As far as Linux, another great example, we have operating systems and open source elements, even Joomla. I mean, these things are powerful, and they're people simply volunteering their time to improve it and distribute it for free. I think that's incredible, and that is something that definitely should persist in the future because it's proven itself to be very, very effective in a global community type of way, as opposed to just a rigid team of people sitting back getting paid to do what they do. It's truly an amazing feat that we're able to do that, and it really shows the interest that people have to be a part of a community and invent, even when they're not being monetarily compensated for it, because it benefits them. That's the beauty of open source. You contribute, it improves your work along with everyone else, and that goes vice versa, and that's a powerful, powerful place to be. Number 9, I believe. During the transition, it is wise to implement a temporary social stratification system that manages access to desirable shelter and equipment that remains scarce at the time. Let me read this real fast. Okay, I see what you're saying. That's an interesting idea. I'm not going to repeat that because it's too abstract, and there's a lot of things that can be stated. It's not really a question. If anyone wants to read what they wrote, you can go to the Zeitgeist Movement Radio, August 17th, 2011, host Peter Joseph, TZM thread at thezeitgeistmovement.com to see that. Number 9 again. You mentioned late last year that you would eventually write a piece on the spectrum of marginalization. Could you please remind the community the possible and possibly elaborate a little bit on what exactly you meant by this? Yeah, that's true. There's so many things going on. I apologize if I stated that and didn't get to it. It was really just an attempt to show, well, it's going to be an expression to show the different ways that the Zeitgeist movement or participants are marginalized by both the mainstream or even sort of this sort of a fringe, hatred-filled blog culture, usually very religiously driven, or then of course like the people that just refer to us as, in derogatory, slanderous ways without any intellectual issue. I kind of went through that a little bit when I talked about the circus, meaning those that engage in prima facie associations, and straw men only, which is on one side of the spectrum, and then on the other side there's actually those that have something intellectual to talk about or a very specific point. The difference in the spectrum of marginalization is between those that have critical thought, such as, even those that have criticized us, from David Ray Griffin, not David, excuse me, no, Ed Griffin, Edward G. Griffin, excuse me, Edward G. Griffin, or Stefan Molyneux, or even in certain pockets Alex Jones. A lot of these sort of general criticisms that have come up, at least they're kind of trying to understand